And we're live. It's 12 a.m. on Wednesday, the 25th of May, which also happens to be Africa Day. So it's an appropriate day to discuss the opportunities that our tourism, our slightly beaten and battered tourism industry presents to grow our economy and grow jobs. So it's lovely to be with you all. It's lovely to have my two co-hosts with me. And thanks very much to ENS for sponsoring today's webinar. To all of you out there who are listening, please drop your questions into the chat column, and I'll try and get as many of them answered in the course of our discussion as possible. But just by way of background, we all know the National Development Plan has articulated this, that tourism is one of the key levers. It's a pillar from which or on which we can drive employment and economic growth. Yet this industry was smashed. It was absolutely smashed by the COVID pandemic. And I really don't need to spell out the devastation to all of you. But what we also know is that even without the COVID pandemic and the ruin that it brought, 2018 and 2019 saw declines in the number of international tourists visiting South Africa. So we have to raise our game. And with me to discuss our opportunities, our failures, our next steps, I have two real industry veterans with me. I have Graham Wood, who's the Chief Operating Officer responsible for hospitality at Sun International. And he took this hot seat in February 2020, which really was a ghastly time. But actually returning to Sun International after 12 years in the industry, where he was MD of hotels at Sun, where he was consulting, where he was kind of live and large in the tourism industry. I also have with me Tshifhiwa Tshivhengwa, who is the CEO, he probably needs not much introduction to all of you, of the Tourism Business Council of South Africa. And in his 20 years in the world of tourism, he's worked across South Africa's value chain. He's been part of South African tourism. He's been part of FIDASA, Rennie's Travel. And among his roles, he serves on the global board of advisors for something called the Sigmund Project, which supports innovation and collaboration in tourism across the globe. So I'm sure you will join me in welcoming these two guests to our webinar today, and we definitely in good hands. So a very, very warm welcome to you both. And I think let's start with the green shoots. I mean, I've been reading that we're seeing a revival in tourism numbers. We're seeing a revival in the number of flights and the number of people coming into the country, as well as even more airlines and things coming in. So starting with you, Tshifhiwa, followed by Graham, I'd like to hear from both of you on this one. Tell me what you're seeing. I mean, what are we seeing in this revival? Is it a dribble, drip, slow thing, or are we seeing a rebound, an exciting rebound? Starting with you, Tshifhiwa, go for it.
Well, thank you for having me, and good afternoon, everyone. Indeed, we are seeing a rebound across the value chain, and it is largely driven by domestic travel. A whole lot more of leisure travel, and we can start to see, a bit of corporate and government travel starting to come back. And from the numbers that we see, we have seen that when you have these holidays, that incorporates weekend, we start to see high number of people, traveling and really, getting on the road or flying. So we're starting to see that recovery starting to kick in on a bit of a faster pace, although we are cautious because, it may stagnate. Winter is coming or it's here. And usually in winter, travel tends to be a little bit slower. But we have seen along the value chain from the car rental space, we have seen, that some of the car rentals are performing very, very well, which shows that, there is something happening from that point of view. Graham can touch on the hotels and many others along the accommodation value chain. The attractions, we've seen that, they're picking up. But it's not at the levels of 2019 yet. We're still a bit far off. And also we're competing with cost because the input costs are rising, electricity cost, and the lack thereof of electricity does impact on the input cost. The wages, are rising, and many other things, are going up. So we do see that, we are recovering. We are on that road. There are some green shoots. But we've got to be wary about the fact that we've lost 2 years in our recovery to the 2019 numbers. If you put in the inflation, and you will see that we're still far behind. So nonetheless, if you look back from the when we were on a hard lockdown and we're not operational, and the gradual reopening of the industry, you can see that since last year, I would say about November, December, we started to see a bit more of faster pace of recovery, and it's continuing in this year, and hopefully it continues that way, and we should be able to get back to the numbers that we saw. But from what we've seen, we collect the tourism levy. We've seen that the last time we did our accounting work, and we compared month on month. This was the month, last month compared with last month in 2022, which is May, compared with May, which is April, compared with April in 2019, we saw 84% recovery in terms of, from the revenue collection point of view. But that doesn't mean that the occupancy were not higher. And that doesn't mean that the room, rate was higher. It just simply means that from along the value chain, from everyone, from car rentals to travel agents to accommodation, both big and small, we saw a figure of 84% of what we usually collect, what we collected in, this year, April, 84% versus what we collected in 2019, same month of April. So it's a good sign, but it doesn't mean it's going to continue that way because tourism has seasons.
Thank you. Graham, what are you seeing on the ground?
Thanks, Sasha. Thanks for having me. It's good to see my good friend Chief again. And we've been speaking a lot, obviously, during COVID times. And I would also just like to take the opportunity to once again recognize the efforts that Chief in particular, together with others, but Chief really was at the forefront of the efforts that we put in place to help lobby for the earlier opening of our industry. So I think it's important that we recognize those efforts. I think following on from Chief's summation, what we have seen is a recovery quicker in the resort-style properties. So leisure properties that have been focused on leisure, largely self-drive leisure properties. So you take a property like ours, like Sun City, quite a fast recovery in domestic leisure demand. Not at pre-COVID levels yet, but almost. You take a node like Umhlanga. Umhlanga has outperformed everywhere else in the country in the first 3 or 4 months of 2022. Why? Because of its self-drive leisure attraction, particularly from Gauteng, etc. And what's been quite pleasing has been the recovery in conferencing in a relatively short period of time. When we were putting our budgets together in November last year, we have a calendar year as our year end, and it really was a bit of a shot in the dark to try and say, well, try and estimate what the pace of recovery is going to be. And if you remember, a really good season at the end of last year, we started to see some loosening up of regulations in January, and that started to spur on quite a rapid increase in conferencing demand. And I'm not talking about the small meetings. I'm talking about the big stuff. We've had 700-800 PAX conferences come into some of our properties, which is encouraging. A lot of repeat business that had gone away for a couple of years because of COVID is starting to come back and book. And I think I think a lot of people are over this virtual world, not so much from a corporate travel point of view, because I'll talk about that now, but I think from a meetings point of view, I think people want to reconnect and get people back together. And we're seeing that in our group's business. What we're not seeing is a recovery to the same degree in the corporate travel space. The Santa node is under tremendous pressure. It's got a combination of new supply that's come on stream into the node that came on slightly before COVID. So we've got that supply that needs to be, taken care of in the market, together with the soft corporate travel segment, particularly with the financial institutions being a little bit gun shy in terms of moving their people around. So the corporate travel nodes are under pressure, but the self-drive weekend and holiday destination properties are recovering quite nicely. I think I saw a question being posted: when do we think we'll get back to pre-COVID levels? I think domestically, from a leisure point of view and from a conferencing point of view, by the end of, my prediction is by Q3, barring no silly things that happen, I think by Q3 we should be back at pre-COVID-19 levels in those two segments. The international segment's going to take a lot longer. I'm sure Chief will talk to that as well. But we've missed the November to March international travel season. I'm talking about the one just gone. But I do think the European and North American demand for November through March into 2023, I think could be, I say guarded with reservation, could be near pre-COVID levels. I don't think we'll be there quite at that level by the end of the year.
So given what you've both just told me, and again, I'm going to address this question, I think, to both of you, can we just sit back then and just wait for the numbers to rise and return back to COVID? I mean, is it to before COVID? I mean, is it enough to just sit back? Because things seem to be trending in the right direction. Tshifhiwa, do you want us to jump in there first again, and then we'll move back to Graham again?
Well, we can't sit back and wait for the numbers to improve. We've got to create a situation whereby we can get more tourists coming into the country, and also more South Africans traveling their own country, and people within the region really coming into South Africa and experiencing the destination. So number one, we've got to, and we've spoken about this on our tourism recovery strategy that went through to government and then approved by the cabinet, is that we need to reignite demand. That's the most important thing. And how do we reignite demand? We've got to go out there internationally and defend our market share in the existing markets. And our existing markets is what Graham was talking about. If you look at Europe, you look at North America, those are very key markets. And you look at Europe, Germany is very key. You look at the likes of UK, a key market, and of course others that are there. Your France and Netherlands and many others around that area are very key in terms of the international arrivals. But we must make sure that we contextualize this. We were getting around 2.6 million international arrivals outside of the African continent. So our market share outside of the African continent is not that great. If you look at the likes of Australia, they get 1.2 million tourists, and this is pre-COVID numbers. 1.2 million, 1.3 million tourists coming from China alone. We get around 95,000. The same in India, 95,000. So the most important thing is that how do we reignite the markets that already know us and, really generate interest so that people can come back into South Africa. And we've seen this in the US, whereby, you now have a Delta Airlines really competing with United, bringing a lot of airlift into South Africa. You see with the UK, the Virgin Atlantic introducing the Cape Town route. We need more here, up in Johannesburg. We need more into Durban. And we do have, other European carriers that are going to be flying directly into the Kruger Mpumalanga airport. So we've got to do something about it. The marketing of the country is important. The work that South African tourism needs to do is important. The branding, the showing, visuals about our country is important. And from the domestic point of view, encouraging as many people locally to travel and making it worthwhile and pricing right, it's important for people to be able to move around. Again, we're competing with many other things. Petrol prices have gone up. that means traveling is going to be much more expensive. Interest rates have gone up. People are going to reprioritize how they spend their money. So for us is to ensure that we create a situation whereby we don't sit back. We always have to be out there in the marketplace, encouraging South Africans to travel, encourage the region to travel, also get the international market to return. What Graham said is right. The most important thing, especially here locally, if we don't get corporate travel to return, and corporate travel, I'm going to include also government travel, it's going to be very difficult for those places that are reliant on corporate and government travel for conferencing and for people that are moving around into those nodes, to come back. So we need to figure out a way of reimagining, corporate travel and encouraging, consumption of travel, by government to ensure that, we return to those levels. Otherwise, we're going to have to go elsewhere to source, new markets, to come in and really plug into that gap. So it's quite important that we do that. It's quite important that we don't sit back. And also from the domestic point of view, dealing with issues of safety and security is important to make sure that, those that are traveling into the country return with good memories. That has always been a challenge. It's been with us for a very, very long time. We need to deal with it, in a more robust way to make sure that, we come up with some solution. But I think that the more we get tourists coming into the country, the more jobs we're going to create, and the more we're going to deal with the issue of unemployment. And hopefully that issue of unemployment, if it's dealt with properly, we're going to have more young people into the industry and less, maybe less of crime, could happen going forward.
Okay. No, thank you for that. And Graham, before you dive in, I'm assuming that we've been doing all of those things and that our international marketing efforts are targeting, the big destinations, that we are defending market share. Why are we not getting more visitors to the country, and how can we do things a little differently? Will you reflect on that as well when you answer Graham? Thank you.
Yeah, sure, Sasha. I'd just like to take also a step back. You made a comment saying, right from the beginning, saying we've had 2 years of a horrid time, and are we just going to sit back and allow demand to slowly recover? I think the important thing that we all need to realize as well is that anybody who is in the tourism industry that is still going and is here today has gone through an enormous amount of work to unpack what their business actually entails and what structures are required and what costs do you need and what you don't need. So we've all done a hell of a lot of work in streamlining our businesses. And I think as businesses, we've probably hopefully come out a bit healthier and a little bit more of a better chance to be sustainable. So that's, I think, one takeout that I got out of the industry over the last 2 years. But the real key for me is to pick up on Chief's point. 2.5 million international long-haul, international air arrivals into South Africa is desperate. It has been that number for the better part of, Chief, maybe last 4 or 5 years pre-COVID. No real growth. The upside for our country is that we have traditional source markets that know us and understand us. So, and I'm talking about North America, and I'm talking about UK and Europe. The emerging markets like India and China, those require separate strategies. So you then have to ask yourself the question, well, why are we only only getting 2.5 million visitors? Well, there's two simple reasons. One, airlift hasn't been sufficient. And two, it's been difficult for travelers to get to us. Particularly
Graham, when you say airlift hasn't been sufficient, not enough flights are flying into the country?
Not enough flights coming in. And look, long-haul destinations are difficult you're never going to compete with the short-haul leisure destinations that you have in Europe, where I remember reading once that Spain has 50 million tourists a year, leisure tourists a year going into Spain because it's a short-haul destination. We'll never be that. But we need to aspire as a country and as an industry to get to at least 10 million, 12 million air arrivals outside of, excluding Africa, into our country, because that creates jobs. Coupled with picking up a Chief's point, coupled with a continual promotion of our industry to our domestic travel market, and inculcate a culture of travel within our country. Chief and I were talking yesterday in advance of this. You know, our tourism industry centers largely around our key attractions. It's largely the Kruger, it's Cape Town, and a little bit of KZN domestically, and some of the gardenery. That's really about it. But what about the rural effect or opportunities in our tourism industry? How do we create what we call geographic spread and grow people into the other parts of our wonderful country? Because we do have the attractions. But I think the biggest opportunity for us is to create all things tourism in our country. You know, the president spoke about tourism being a priority industry because he understands the importance of job creation in our tourism industry. And we've shared jobs. Of course, we've shared jobs. We've got to get those back. But let's make this a holistic priority. Let's sort out the issues that home affairs. Let's sort out infrastructure. These are not difficult things to sort out, but let's create a holistic approach to sorting out the tourism impediments. And then I think you'll see a growth in our tourism industry, because there are amazing attractions, and there are people who are willing to travel. We've seen it because of the domestic leisure recovery. So let's just keep on promoting our industry holistically, and it'll take time, but I think we can start to see the growth in opportunity. We'll talk about international marketing separately.
Okay, so, and I also want to talk to your point about a geographic spread, but I'll park that for a second. On the holistic thinking, do we need to restructure? I've seen criticism about the fact that every province has its own tourism department, and that's creating silos, it's creating inefficiencies. Do we need to relook that structure? Do we need to centralize tourism marketing under a national department that perhaps markets everything from, you know, Etosha to Cape Town to, you know, the Golden Gate? Is that something that one needs to look at? And the question's open to either of you to take.
Well,
Chief, why don't you go first?
Yeah, well, thanks, Graham. Well, look, it's a big question because it speaks to the three spheres of government. And you look at where tourism happens, it happens on a on a local level. That's when, where we drive, the roads, maintenance, and many things that has to do with that. So it becomes a political type of determination in terms of how certain things should be run and where it should belong. But for us in the private sector, what's most important is that when we do market our country, we don't go out there and compete. And we're sitting and you have one ad that's coming from Mpumalanga that says something against the ad that comes from Free State and so forth and so on. We need to be, harmonious when we do that. As far as whether we need to have one marketing agency and not use the provinces, I think it's a policy issue. And we've got to look at it and say, how do we want to approach, tourism, into the future? I mean, there are many, countries that are doing the same things that we're doing. If you look at Australia, they've got, they do similar type of things where they do marketing, but they are able to work together. So I think if we are to continue with the model that we use, whereby you've got South African tourism marketing, South Africa, and then you've got all these provinces marketing the province, we just need to make sure that we are well aligned and we can be able to, sort of hunt as a pack and not compete out there, because when we compete out there, we're going to lose tourists to other markets. Because we should always remember, tourists have choice. They might want to come to the beach in KZN or go to the beach in Kenya or elsewhere around the world. So we've got to make sure that, our value proposition is compelling enough and we're not competing in that space. So if we continue with the same, we have to be more, harmonious. We've got to work together. We've got to make sure that, the country comes first before we get into the province, the district, and what they do when they arrive here. It's important that we spread, the experiences, as Graham have said, in terms of geographical spread. Because one of the things I remember when we were in 2019, when we did a roadshow in Europe and North America, one of the things people were saying is that what's new that people should be coming and see. They already know that there's Cape Town. They already know that there's Kruger National Park. They know that you come to Joburg, you will go to the Vilakazi Street and have a township experience. But what's new? So one of the challenges that sits with us is to make sure that we develop more things, and the provinces could help to develop those nodes, the tourism nodes in various areas of the provinces, and also support the tourism development to make sure that there are things to do. And not only, just drive to my village and my village has this one thing to do. No one is going to drive for 4 hours to do just one thing. So tourism development is key. So perhaps the province is focusing more on the tourism development, making sure that the infrastructure is right, the roads are right, and people can be able to reach, those attractions. I think that's key. But if we were to look at a different approach and say, well, let's have one marketing agency, it's a policy approach. We've got to look at the best practice. And we've got to, learn from those who have done it well, and be able to say, is this something that we can do, in South Africa? Are there benefits? Of course, in terms of consolidation of budgets, there could be a greater benefit where we can have a larger exposure, because the budget that we have coming from, National Treasury, if you look at tourism, it's probably the least funded department. It simply means the money that goes to tourism. If you look at it, even if it's 1.2 billion rand or 1.3 billion rand, if you convert that to dollars or pounds or other currencies where we need to have exposure, it's not that much money. And we're competing with other places that puts in, a lot more money, than ourselves. But it's an approach, and we've got to decide. But if we stick with what we have, we've got to work together, hunt as a pack. If we want to have a different approach, let's learn from the best and implement what others have done.
Do you want to dive in there, Graham, or?
I completely agree with Chief. It worries me. It worries me if we're going to contemplate consolidate. He's raising the point that we start consolidating, because he's right. It's a policy issue, and before we've wiped the sleep out of our eyes, it will be another 2 years before we've got a policy decision. So I think in the short term, because we have a short-term need, I think we really need to, as influencers in this industry, we need to push for more budget for SA Tourism and the marketing agency. They themselves have got work to do in making sure they've got the right resources in the right places, starting with, the board of SA Tourism, having the right people on the board, get the mandate for the new board defined and get them appointed, get a CEO appointed of SA Tourism. So bring some structure to that.
That board is dysfunctional. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the term of the existing board has ended, so there's a new board that has to be appointed. So they're going through that process. Okay. But they also need to appoint a CEO. So let's get that done. Let's get more money for the marketing agency. Chief works very well with TBCSA, has worked very well with the SA Tourism over recent years to try and create synergies between the work that we do through the monies collected by Tom. So how do we support the efforts of SA Tourism? And then the provincial tourism authorities, yes, they. I think the biggest problem is that every provincial tourism authority thinks that they need to go and attend every single travel show around the world, as opposed to being, maybe I'm being a little unfair, but they need to be very clear on what they're targeting. What attractions do they have, and who are their source markets? And if a certain province says, listen, my focus is going to be on domestic tourism because I'm a self-drive destination and that's where I get the bang for my buck, then focus on that. And go back to Chief's point, is allow the province to decide what their attractions are and where they best position themselves domestically and globally. Because it's not only province and national, it's also municipality driven. So there's also the district municipalities start to get involved as well. They've also got small marketing and tourism marketing budgets. So create that alignment. And that started, we had the, Chief, you remember there was the engagement with the provincial tourism authorities, etc., and the various MECs. It started, it was going along quite nicely pre-COVID. So I think that's got to be reestablished. But I go back to the point earlier that I made. It's not just about tourism marketing. It's about the holistic approach to tourism. There's some comments been raised here about crime and things. Yes, those have to be sorted out as a priority. Home Affairs have got to get their act together. We've got to get the visa issue sorted out domestically and international visas. Those things are all part of tourism. They're not independent of tourism. They're all part of tourism. So I think that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're talking about oiling the tracks or smoothing the rails, for want of a better expression, I saw there was and I don't know if this is still the case, there was an e-visa pilot underway, or it was initiated. Can either of you provide an update there? I mean, is there a way of smoothing we've been through a visa debacle a couple of years ago, and it is easier now, but have things improved? I mean, has there been a shift? Graham, you were talking about shifts. We need a shift here completely. Is there any sign on the horizon that we're shifting with regard to visas?
Let Chief answer that.
Well, is there a shift? There is some shift. We did say that, we want a world-class e-visa system. The likes of which, if you look at the countries like Turkey, they use, you want to go to Turkey, you apply, you get your visa. It doesn't take long time. But what we seem to have is an e-visa application system, where instead of going and queuing and submitting your papers, you submit them online, but it doesn't have a risk engine in it to issue you a visa immediately. It still has to be adjudicated by a team of people that are probably sitting here in Pretoria, then uploaded and so forth and so on. So we have made some progress, but I don't think it's enough, because it's not pushing lots of tourists coming from, as an example, Ghana. When I was at Africa Travel Indaba, I had people from Ghana saying there could have been more of us coming here, but others couldn't get visa to come here. There are people who are interested in coming and do shopping here in South Africa, but they end up going to Dubai or to France because they cannot get the visa. So we still have an issue when it comes to that. One of the things that we've said is that, we've got to give more visa waivers, to various countries. If you go to Eastern Europe, the countries in Eastern Europe still require visa to come to South Africa, although they are part of European Union and they are part of the whole Schengen, system. So why can't we include them, and make sure that, they're able to travel or do the visa waivers for those countries? We've been saying this for many years. If you look at China and you look at India, you've got a lot of people that have visa for United States, for UK, for Australia, and we still require them to get visa for South Africa. Instead, we've been saying that we should be recognizing those visas that they have, that they don't pose any risk to us. If you have a visa for the United States or for the UK or for whatever country it may be, if you want to come to South Africa, you don't require to go and queue for the visa, to come to South Africa. So those are the type of things that we need to do. For example, Mexico does that. If you have a visa for the US, if I depart here and I go to the US and I want to go to Mexico, I just cross over to Mexico. I don't need to apply for a visa. They recognize the US visa and they will let me in. So we need to implement those type of things so that we don't take people that are frequent travelers and subject them, to the visa regime. So we need to solve that situation. It's not at a place where we can be proud of at the moment. There's still a whole lot more that we need to do.
Do we have a minister who's in our corner? I mean, is our tourism minister, is she in our corner, in your view, in this regard? I mean, is she fighting the fight? Is she taking debate to Home Affairs, for instance, on the industry's behalf?
Well, I believe that is happening from the tourism point of view, but that matter sits squarely with the Department of Home Affairs in terms of making sure that they deliver on that mandate. And what we've been saying is that it would have been nice, to say now that we're at a sort of a post-COVID, although COVID is still here, we are open for business. It's easier to come to South Africa. Here is the e-visa that you can use. It's fast, it's efficient. You should be able to come here and do what you need to do without the hassle. But we still have the problems of visas, be it people coming from China, be it people coming from India, be it people coming from West Africa, and many other places that has a potential, to bring more people here. I've had calls from people saying, there are certain offices that even other Africa type of organization wants to move to the likes of Rwanda because they're saying that it's very difficult to get a visa to come to South Africa. So they'd rather move an office to a country where it's easier. So we have a bigger challenge with this visa situation. And not only does it affect tourism, it affects business, it affects investments, and we need to solve it. Not talk about it, but solve it by way of putting a system that is efficient. And there are systems out there that we can bring in, we plug in, we should be able to use. But I know we're developing our own, the rest is history. I'll leave it there.
Do you want to add to that, Graham, or can I ask you one on sport?
I don't think I need to add to Chief. I mean, just make it easier to get to us. As long as we've got a plane that you can jump on and it's easy to get to, and even better, get a visa on arrival, then we're open for business. There's a question, Sasha, that was being raised by somebody, because it follows on from what I've just said. About a question was raised, well, what are people looking for from a travel experience point of view in a post-COVID world? And it's a very interesting and important question because it talks to one of our unique advantages as a destination. People are looking for space and they're looking for the outdoors. That's what they're looking for, domestically and internationally. And we have an abundance of that. We've got space, we've got beautiful outdoors, we've got the mountains, we've got the oceans, and we've got the game parks. And people are also looking for authentic travel experiences. People are, there's been a reawakening of people's senses, having been locked up for 2 years. I think people are wanting to explore and experience, and they're wanting the outside and the big wide world. So we have that. And I think the SAT's campaign that they recently launched actually did talk to that, about that sense of space and authenticity and nature, which is what we have to offer in abundance. So we've got the vital ingredients to be able to satisfy those needs of a traveler in a post-COVID world.
So I mean, there was another lovely question, which was, why have we allowed the blue train to implode? And linking that to your question about geographic spread, our Vredefort Dome is one of the world's foremost geological marvels. Yet there's very little that has been done to market that area, to grow or build interest in that area, to develop it there. I think the museum fell apart before it could even be filled with interesting kind of stories and tales. So who's responsible for developing outside of Cape Town and outside of the Kruger National Park, and how do we grow these? I mean, as you have both referred to, we need new things, we need interesting things that appeal to the sense of adventure, the sense of the great outdoors. How do we take what we have further?
Can I start, Chief?
Yeah.
So the blue train's an interesting one. Obviously, the blue train's been impacted by the issue with regards to the quality of the rail infrastructure in our country. But interestingly, we've actually had a couple of discussions with the blue train to start doing some stuff with them again. So I think there is a desire within the blue train business to get moving again. The interesting thing you spoke about the museums, because again, I go back to what I said. So they sit in a arts, culture, heritage industry. But again, that industry needs to be able to turn itself on its head and say, we're actually in the tourism industry. We're actually a must-see destination. And how do we create an environment with other stakeholders to encourage people to visit us, as opposed to looking at ourselves in isolation? Chief, maybe you want to talk about what you experienced yesterday with the Botanical Gardens guys. It's the same thing, beautiful gardens and experiences we have, but it's not just about what happens within that specific. It's about how are we using that attraction as part of our global tourism offering. You wanted to talk about sport. Let's come back to that because that's an important industry as well. But maybe, Chief, you jump in.
Well, yeah, that's right. So the development outside of what we already know is quite important. That's why I spoke about the tourism development. Perhaps, this should be the competencies or competency that sits with the local government and the provincial government. We need to create nodes outside of what's already known. But for entrepreneurs to go into that space and create things, you need roads, you need water infrastructure, things that we cannot put together in ourselves. So it goes back to the consolidation in terms of planning. And I'll give you an example. So in South Africa, we've got all these dams, many dams that are sitting around the whole country that are owned by the Department of Water and Sanitation. We've been talking about, those assets and say, how do we develop tourism around these assets? Because usually when they are planned, they're not planned with tourism in mind, meaning that the consolidation, it's not there in terms of we're going to be putting the dam. Maybe it's better to put the dam with this and that will support tourism and local people. And also there could be accommodation here and so forth and so on. The other uses of that particular, infrastructure. So we do have many things that are happening, but we are not coordinated enough to make sure that we utilize these spaces and we create more tourism experiences around these spaces. So it's something that we've been discussing and say, how do we put tourism development around that? You talk about the botanical gardens, they're there, but they hardly feature within our own tourism, value chain. How do we then talk about, the commercialization of those botanical gardens? How do we infuse them into the offering of tourism and make sure that, there's more that needs to be done? Issues around arts and culture, our traditions, how do we make sure that we create packages around that? But infrastructure is important so that we can get there and we can be able to do that. That if we don't have enough infrastructure, it becomes a very niche tourism offering whereby you're going to get one or two people there and it's not sustainable, for the entrepreneurs that want to enter the space. So that consolidation is key. That development is key. And we've got to be intentional about it. It can't be something that we sort of touch and go and say, well, today is this, tomorrow is that. We've got to put all our efforts in there. We've got to make sure that, we build up there. And one of the things that I believe we should look at one major project within, South Africa. You look at, the whole Disney concept. There's Disney in many parts of the world, but there's no Disney in Africa. So a big project like that could go a long way. And look at Graham, it's background picture there in Sun City, the building of Sun City, how it impacted the communities around, how it became a node, and how tourism develops in the area, and how many people benefit from that. We may need to look at another major project whereby we can put something that can create jobs, and it could be a tourism development project. So, but I think that we have the spaces. We have the landscape, we have everything, or all the ingredients, as Graham have said, to make sure that our destination is successful. But tourism development is important, it's key. We are mostly nature-based, tourism attraction, but the main tourism attraction, we still have to build on that. If you look at the likes of Dubai, the man-made tourism attraction is 90% of what they have, and a desert and an ocean are probably the two natural things, but most of the things are man-made. They're built. A lot of people go there. They enjoy those things. Perhaps we need to look at that and say, what are the big things that we need to be doing? And consolidation is key so that we can consolidate everyone else across government to make sure that there's proper planning.
Yeah, it would be lovely to have a Sun City type idea, or a kind of a big inspirational, big bold idea. At the moment, we have flagpoles and Ferris wheels.
Yeah, I think, Sasha, I think we can start. Let's start on a small scale. Let's start by creating a culture of tourism in our country, not in our industry, in our country. Maybe we could start by a national campaign driven by tourism to pick up litter as a small example. I don't know what you see, but what I see is degradation of our streets and of our areas where we live. Airports are getting dirty; they need to be cleaned. Pavements are breaking up, etc. We need to start that process. Let's start a process of inculcating a culture of tourism in our country. We need to work with Department of Education, get careers, get tourism into the curriculum. Let's start breeding tourism as a cultural what's the word? A cultural must-have in our country. That we start and it has to start now, because we're not going to fix the tourism. We're not going to. There's no silver bullet that's going to fix tourism in the short term. This is a slow process of rebuilding, but I think we need to start now by creating this holistic culture of tourism in our country, because it is a great growth and job opportunity. We've got such an unemployed youth problem at the moment, and there are schemes and things available through Department of Labour, like unemployed learnerships, etc., which we are starting to really focus on now. Employ a lot more unemployed learners, so that we can actually start creating people giving people a skill that they can go out into the tourism industry, maybe start their own little business, or they become more employable, etc. Those are the things we've really got to start doing, because I'm afraid if we bumble along like we continue to do, we're going to get more of the same. We're going to get an industry that's not going to grow to the extent that we all know that it's potentially capable of growing
to. And I guess so often we come back to the twin challenges of, incompetence and a lack of budget. But I do think there are creative, out of the box ways of solving these problems. And like TikTok, Kruger National Park is apparently one of the 10 most popular parks globally on TikTok. Now, TikTok is my children use TikTok. I've never used it in my life before, but that's what the younger generation are using. I mean, is that something that our marketing efforts, are those channels that we are using, deploying? Are they part of our arsenal in any way, or are we relying on old-fashioned traditional trade shows?
I think it's a combination of both. If you look at our traditional markets as to how do people come to South Africa, I'm talking about the international markets, a lot of it comes through digital and through OTAs and digital media and digital marketing, but a lot of it still comes through the traditional tour operator channels and the DMCs with big groups. It's still quite a traditional travel channel. So you have to be at those various events, connecting with buyers, connecting with tour operators, etc. But you have to be alive to the opportunities that digital marketing and social media present, both at a national level, provincial level, and within your own businesses. We do very little above the line traditional media anymore at a place like Sun City. Most of it is digitally focused now. A lot of it is CRM based. It's cheaper, it's more effective, and you're talking to the needs and wants of what your your customers. So it has to be an embracing of what the digital channels offer.
So Graham, coming back to your idea of starting small, I mean, I like that idea and it makes sense, litter campaigns and things, but I'm looking here at Helga's question, and there's nothing that inspires a collective imagination, a collective citizenship more than a big goal, a big event. I mean, like the World Cup did. So Helga's asking, what about Formula One? I mean, can we have a big goal as well as all the small goals? Can we tie them together in some way? I mean, can we look at, I know there's been discussion for a while about bringing Formula One back to the country, but are there those kinds of initiatives underway? Chief, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, so you're quite right. We've got to fix what we need to fix first, because we can't go and build new stuff and not fix the old things. We have learned with, you look at our cities, we've built, Sandton and other cities far away from Johannesburg, and Johannesburg, falls apart. And the rest, continue. So we've got to fix what we have. We've got to clean up our streets. We've got to make sure that it's conducive before we get into big projects. But there's nothing wrong with, these aspirations and so forth and so on. So there is that. So coming to your question, I've lost my train of thought.
International events.
Formula One. Is there an initiative?
So Formula One is an example. There has been, I was actually involved in a discussion about a month ago about that particular event and trying to bring it into Johannesburg, into Kyalami, and the things that needs to happen for it to come through, the expansion and so forth and so on. So there is appetite, for those type of events. The question becomes the cost to bring it in, and that's something that's under discussion. But it shows that there is appetite for those type of things. I know that in Cape Town there's going to be, I think they call it Formula E, with the electric vehicles. That's coming up in Cape Town. So there are talks about Formula One and other major events, that we can, host here in South Africa. Again, the cost is always, there has to be cost attached to it. There has to be commitment. And I would say that commitment from government, from the private sector side, we're always ready. We've hosted many major events, so we have learned from that. So we are ready to host any type of event that may come our way. But those type of things are under discussion, and hopefully, from my side, is that we manage to successfully deliver on that, and we can have this Formula One, type of season where it comes into South Africa. So it's something that I think will be great, and hopefully it goes through.
Okay, well, it's something to look forward to. So we've got a couple of minutes left, and I just want to try and get to a couple of questions. So they may not necessarily flow, but they're interesting questions. And Dirk, right in the beginning of our conversation, Dirk Grayskins, he was talking about, and perhaps you can give a comment, apparently SA Tourism has not done much about supporting the overseas backpacker industry. And he's asking, should we not let international low-cost airlines compete to offer cheaper economy tickets into the country to promote and support the backpacker industry? And I don't know who wants to take a dive at that question. It's something that probably you guys know more about than me. Chief, do you want to start?
Well, when it comes to whether we can get low-cost carriers to fly into South Africa, I don't think we restrict anyone from flying to South Africa. It's a matter of, how do we improve the airlift? And also, of course, when you fly certain hours, you've got to comply with certain regulations and so forth and so on. So it's a matter of, how do we deal with improving airlift? How do we support, the various subsectors of the industry? And yes, there may not be a specific promotion within the South African tourism or the provinces or the municipalities in terms of, a specific subsector. But it's up to us to plug into that and be able to say, how do we sell this different type of things? Usually the backpacking market is a youth market. They come here, some of them are in a gap year, they're trying to go through the country, they stay longer, which is good. And we need to make sure that we cater for that market. So it is something that I think for us as a country, airlift is important, and I've said that we need to get as many airlines to connect South Africa with as many cities around the world, so that we can get as many people coming into the country and create jobs. So, subsector issues or a segment of accommodation, it's something that we've got to plug into the larger picture and be able to get into that market and get as many people coming in as possible. The same applies to golf and many other types of tourism that we could be marketing.
I mean, I remember during the lockdown what a huge effort it was just to allow sailing boats into the country. Just people who were sailing, who were getting caught in typhoon season and had been on their boat for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks and had no exposure to COVID whatsoever. It seems like we miss these opportunities all the time. But moving from that onto SME businesses and smaller, the startup businesses in our tourism industry. One of the questions was about the banks and I'm going to blend this with both banks offering loans and government support schemes for smaller businesses. Do you think there's enough being done there to kickstart, the SME side of the tourism industry? It's a very different world to the one you inhabit, Graham, but you might have some thoughts on that, and Chief, I'm sure you do too. We've got 2 or 3 minutes left, so let's answer that and then I'll conclude.
So in less than a minute, the government guarantee loan scheme that was there, the 300 billion, it wasn't successful at all. About 18 or 19 billion ended up being used. And that's why there's an introduction of the bounce back scheme, by government. And again, we still need to look at this bounce back scheme and to see if it's friendly to small businesses and they're able to get, the required loans to be able to operate their businesses. Because the initial thought was to make sure that we protect these businesses and we protect, the supply side of tourism, but we were unable to do that. So the jury is still out in terms of, this bounce back scheme, whether it's going to be useful, whether it's going to be easy to apply, and whether it's going to support, the small business, the small businesses in the country. But the previous schemes, that the government guaranteed loan scheme was not successful. The schemes that the Department of Tourism did, which is the one that benefited around 4,000 businesses, 50,000 rand each, that was done. Many people said it was a success, but the money was not enough. It was only 200 million. And the need is far greater than that. You're talking about an industry that's almost worth 400 billion rand. And to put in 200 million rand, it's really a drop in the challenges that we have.
Yeah. So just to conclude, I mean, Graham, do you think that we are doing enough to ensure that it's not business as usual, to ensure that our tourism industry can attain its potential? And Chief, we'll move on to you for your views on that.
The question is, are we doing enough?
Are we thinking out of the box?
Sure. It's a very traditional industry. It's a simple industry, and I don't think, despite all the moves to digital marketing and how we communicate, that has changed. But at the end of the day, we're an industry that offers experiences, and it's up to us to make sure that we offer the best experience possible. Can we do more? Of course we can. But I think if we're going to make a seismic shift, I go back to my point of creating a holistic approach to our industry. I think just one last point that I want to make is that it's incumbent on big business like ourselves to help the development of local tourism businesses in our country, whether it be supply development, not only job creation, but let's improve the distribution of goods and services to emerging suppliers, because that also helps create downstream jobs.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to Chief, to give you the last 25 seconds, but I'd like to thank you both. I'd like to thank our audience. I'd like to thank ENS for allowing us to kind of think out of the box a little bit. And on that note, Chief, do you want to just close for us all?
Yeah. So I think we can do better as the tourism industry. Government can do better in terms of creating an enabling environment and supporting the industry. And of course, us as the private sector can always do better in making sure that we include all types of experiences that are across the country to make sure that tourism benefits are felt by everyone, across the country, in communities, young people, and also supporting, women in tourism businesses and so forth and so on. I think we can do better. We have to do better, and government has to play its role. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to close you there before we get cut off. But thank you, both of you. It was wonderful talking. Goodbye, all.
Thank you, Sasha.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.